In what ways would you personally feel that the SI might be like outdated or obsolete today?
In most ways, I don't think it's outdated or obsolete, even though many people will go around acting like they've gone beyond it. Usually that's because they don't understand it. They're not even there, much less bad. There's a few things in Public Secrets where I critique. I say, well, I think they've got a little blind spot here, or one thing or another. But to a great extent, I think that these things that they came up with are still very valid. Yes?
What do you think about Tikkun's use of the spectacle in so much of their work?
I can't answer that. I mean, I'm not, yes. Sally?
We use the internet a lot. In fact, some of the protesting was coordinated through Facebook and other modes and so on. What is your feeling or thought about the internet as aiding revolutionary activity and thought, or even the opposite?
Well, I'm actually pretty pro-internet on those things, as you may know. I think that the possibilities, like as in Egypt, are immense. Like that probably simply wouldn't have happened without that. And then once it did happen, people could immediately let the whole world know what was happening, so it became impossible to just clamp it down. Obviously, in other areas, you could say, well, people sitting at a computer all day is encouraging passivity or something. There's aspects of that. But mostly, I think what's significant is that the internet is interactive, whereas TV and things like radio were not. And that's an enormous difference. It means that somebody can have their own website, they can, all that. So. How is our, somebody was holding up a time for me?
You have like 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Yes?
What's your next step?
My next step, I don't know. I'm trying to keep my house now, and the landlord doesn't want me to keep it. That's my immediate personal thing, yes.
I was just wondering your personal opinion on things like Adbusters and their version or their use of the tournament and things like that.
Well, kind of mixed. They've been inspired by the Situationist use of détournement, and sometimes I look at that and I say, well, that's pretty good, and sometimes I look at it and say, well, that's kind of silly. It's just a tactic or a sort of method, and the method can be used stupidly or so mediocrely or brilliantly or something. So I'm not too, I sort of consider them part of the experimental thing, and then if they do something and it's kind of lame, people will pick up, and if they do something that's insightful, people will pick up that. So yeah, I don't think it's a big deal, but I think I kind of like the fact that a lot of people are doing different stuff like that, because out of that people can compare notes and say, oh, the yes men are doing this, and the whatever. Jeremy.
The few people I know that are familiar with your work, that are familiar with the Situationists, are familiar with it through the book Lipstick Traces, and which is Gabriel Marcus was a Rolling Stone critic who wrote a big book and drew heavily, he thought, upon his understanding of the Situationists to sort of trace this rebellious impulse through the 20th century. And I wondered what you thought of.
There's about a half a page in Public Secrets where I mention that, and I first of all mention him favorably in the sense that when this thing came out, he called me up and wanted to meet me, and I said no. And so, nevertheless, he wrote a very nice, long review saying how great this was and all that. So he deserves credit for that, because sometimes when you put somebody down, they get back at you. The downside is that he remains a very cultural person, and he's really looking at the Situationists as a spectator. So he's saying these guys are really cool. You know, they're like the Dadaists, or they're whatever. And he's emphasizing that and not emphasizing the critical, practical, constructive things that the Situationists were doing radically. In other words, there are certain things in his essay, his review, and in Lipstick Traces where he's sort of saying, well, revolution is, you know, that's kind of not here, but isn't this really cool, and isn't this it? And needless to say, the Situationists were talking about having a practical effect. They weren't talking about some cool, nostalgic. Sure.
You've told the story before of being at a meeting in the 60s that was going to be really inspiring, and then you got there and there were like pictures of Mao Zedong and this really negative shit. And I was wondering if you had any other examples of a point in which, like, you know, you had some kind of like hopefulness around the 60s culture, just where the kind of movement was going culturally, not just political, you know, organizations or events, and kind of a moment in which you sort of felt like it was, you know, going south, just like a personal experience where you just kind of said, wow, this is being corrupted in some way, or this isn't what I thought it was. You know?
Well, that would be like around 1969, and the incident you're talking about was when I went to a Black Panther event, and when I went in there to get tickets for the thing, there's a picture of Stalin on the wall, and I go to the event nevertheless, and I'm kind of a loyal, you know, like soaking up the stuff there. And there was more stuff like that, like a congratulatory telegram from North Korea, and all sorts of stuff. And so when I got out of that, this doesn't feel right. I don't know what went wrong here. And then I went over to a friend of mine who was an anarchist. And I had never looked into anarchism very much, but I sort of thought, you know, I said, give me all your... So I walked home with a big sack full of anarchist books and pamphlets and read them, and they said, yes, this makes sense. Here's what's wrong with this. So that was kind of my halfway point. And then once I was an anarchist, I started being a little bit off to the side, a little bit critical, and so on. And then I discovered the Situationists, and that was yet another leap into where anarchism was still kind of a traditional ideology. The Situationists were more dialectically engaged, and so kind of like one step beyond that. Yes?
What was after the Situationists?
I haven't seen anything yet. Okay, we have maybe one more?
Can you think of anyone that has been more prescient in this situation?
No, not even close.
What was the question?
The question was, could I think of anyone who had been more prescient, in other words, insightful in seeing into the future or so on than the Situationists? And my answer was no.
Yeah, what do you think of this Alain Badiou, the French philosopher? He looks at France as being reality, like,
You know, a lot of these kind of things, I mean, I don't know the particular guy, but a lot of these things strike me as sort of very watered down, misunderstood Situationist imitations. So I think that's probably about enough. I thank you for coming, and I think you're welcome to join me at my table if you want to go on.
Wandering, Urbanism, Nuclear Power, Henry Thoreau, and the History of Cinema.
There they are. Whoa. surveilling.